February 23, 1945, Mount Suribachi, Uema. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto crouched in a concrete bunker, hands trembling as he wrote words that would have earned him execution if discovered by his own officers. The Marines are not human. They do not die like other men. Everything we were told about American weakness was a lie. Through the firing slit, he had just witnessed something that contradicted every assumption drilled into him during training. 6 Marines had stormed his position under withering machine gun fire. 3 fell, but the others kept advancing. When his comrades unleashed a grenade barrage, 1 Marine absorbed the blast with his own body to shield his squad, then continued fighting with catastrophic wounds until he physically could not hold his weapon. The survivors took the position within minutes. 21,000 Japanese defenders occupied Uema, dug into 18 kilometers of tunnels and fortifications. They had been promised they faced soft American troops who would break under pressure. What they encountered instead would shatter every military assessment the Imperial Japanese Army had made about their enemies. The mathematics of this miscalculation were being written not in strategic plans, but in the savage reality of close-quarters combat that would leave 26,000 Marines as casualties in just 36 days. By September, reports from Guadalcanal filtered back to Rabaul and Tokyo. Each was a warning, wrapped in disbelief. Officers wrote of American artillery that fired through the night without pause, of aircraft that appeared each dawn despite claims that Henderson Field had been destroyed, of men who refused to surrender even when cut off and starving. To the senior staff of the Imperial Army, such accounts were anomalies, errors of leadership, failures of spirit. They did not yet understand that Guadalcanal was not an exception, but a revelation. In the months that followed, every Japanese operation on the island ended the same way: courage met by preparation, ferocity broken on logistics, faith overwhelmed by endurance. The Americans did not fight for glory or emperor. They fought because they would not leave. That simple, unshakable fact eroded the foundations of Japanese confidence more completely than any single defeat. For the first time, officers who had once lectured about the superiority of the Japanese fighting spirit began to question whether spirit alone could overcome an enemy that refused to. Guadalcanal was not merely the first American victory of the Pacific War. It was the moment when Japan's leaders began to sense, dimly but unmistakably, that the tide of history was turning against them and that no amount of valor could turn it back. By 1943, Japanese planners no longer spoke of swift victory. Their language changed to attrition, delay, decisive battle on favorable terms. Yet behind those euphemisms was something deeper: the recognition that Japan's moral advantage had vanished. What once defined the imperial soldier, discipline, endurance, and the willingness to die, no longer guaranteed success. The Americans matched those virtues with method, supply, and firepower on a scale no Japanese commander could match or even fully imagine. Reports from New Georgia, Tarawa, and Cape Gloucester repeated the same observations. The enemy no longer fought as individuals, but as extensions of a single machine. Their logistics were endless. Their courage, sustained by confidence that they would not be abandoned. For men like Private Yamamoto, who would later crouch in the black volcanic sand of Iwo Jima and watch entire Marine battalions advance through artillery, fire without hesitation, the transformation seemed supernatural. How could a nation once dismissed as soft produce such soldiers? In Tokyo, officers still quoted Bushido and destiny. In the jungle, on the atolls, and in the caves, their men learned the truth. Japan had not met an enemy, had met a reflection, forged in steel and discipline, powered by factories that never slept. The war that began with faith and spiritual supremacy was now fought against an opponent who believed in nothing mystical at all, only in preparation, endurance, and the certainty of eventual victory. By late 1944, the pattern had become undeniable. Every Japanese position, no matter how fortified, ended the same way: annihilation. Intelligence officers stopped referring to Marine landings as assaults and began calling them extractions by fire. the methodical removal of defenders from their defenses by flame, explosive, and will. Reports from Peleliu, Saipan, and Tinian noted that marine operations followed a logic entirely alien to Japanese planning, where Japanese doctrine emphasized decisive engagements and heroic climax. The Marines fought wars of exhaustion measured in yards and hours. They did not seek glory. They sought completion. Among Japanese field officers, admiration and despair merged into something close to fatalism. Major Tadao Ikeda, writing from Leyte in November 1944, described his impression of captured Marine manuals. They believe victory is not achieved by courage but by system. They build their system so that even courage becomes predictable. Two men raised on the supremacy of spirit, such reasoning felt mechanical, almost heretical. Yet the results were beyond argument. On every island, American logistics turned courage into a resource that could be replenished, while Japanese valor, though undiminished, could only be spent once. When orders were issued to fortify Iwo Jima, the last bastion before the homeland, few among the surviving veterans of Guadalcanal, Tarawa, or Peleliu harbored illusions. They knew what was coming. The Marines would land. They would burn, blast, and tunnel their way forward. They would not stop until the island was theirs, or every man was dead. For Japan, Iwo Jima would not be a battle. It would be a confirmation. Yet even in that grim success lay the seeds of despair. The more Japanese gunners killed, the more Marines seemed to appear. Every destroyed wave was replaced before the smoke cleared. The island's defenders, men hardened by years of fighting in China and the Pacific, realized that the enemy's strength no longer lay in numbers alone, but in an unbreakable process. Kuribayashi's staff called it the machine of war. It absorbed losses that would annihilate a Japanese regiment and continued moving forward with mechanical precision. On March 25, 1945, when organized resistance finally ceased, the Imperial General Headquarters issued a bulletin describing Iwo Jima as a glorious defense. In private, surviving officers recorded another truth. Captain Masayo Chiba, whose bunker collapsed during the final bombardment, wrote in his hospital diary weeks later, "We prove that valor alone cannot stop iron." His words echoed through the interrogations that followed Japan's surrender. For the first time in modern history, Japan's military elite admitted that courage, discipline, and sacrifice, the virtues on which their empire had been built, were insufficient. Against an enemy that had mastered war as an industry, the Americans buried their dead and moved on to Okinawa. The Japanese buried a belief system. From Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, the path was the same: the collapse of faith and spiritual supremacy before the relentless arithmetic of modern war. By the end of 1944, even the most dedicated staff officers could no longer deny what the numbers proved. The Americans had created a new kind of warfare, one where logistics replaced valor as the determining factor. Japan had entered a war of endurance without the means to endure. Every battle became an equation. Japanese strength divided by time, American strength multiplied by supply. The outcome was predetermined before the first shot was fired. Colonel Yusuke Watanabe, an operations planner at Imperial General Headquarters, wrote in a private memorandum never intended for publication. "We once believed the spirit of our soldiers could overcome any material disadvantage. Guadalcanal disproved this. Tarawa and Saipan confirmed it. Iwo Jima made it undeniable. Our soldiers still die bravely, but their deaths no longer purchase time." The realization spread quietly through the ranks. On Okinawa, veterans of Iwo Jima dug in with grim acceptance. They no longer spoke of victory. They spoke of delay. Delay until the homeland could prepare. Delay until America tired of paying the cost. But the Americans did not tire. Each new battle produced fresh divisions, new machines, more supplies than before. The Marines came ashore as if drawn from an endless sea. For Japan's soldiers, the war had ceased to be a contest of will and become an encounter with infinity. Against an enemy who could absorb all losses and continue forward, courage itself lost meaning. That was the true defeat, the understanding that no amount of sacrifice could change the outcome. After the first day of battle, we knew we would lose. For the Japanese soldier, that realization marked the end of belief. The idea of victory had been replaced by endurance for its own sake, fighting not to win, but to demonstrate that the empire still possessed the capacity to suffer. From the caves of Peleliu to the cliffs of Okinawa, every engagement became a ritual of national exhaustion performed before an enemy who could not be deterred. The Marines, for their part, seemed untouched by despair. They advanced with the same steady determination, whether they were winning or bleeding. Their discipline transformed horror into procedure. To the Japanese, this appeared as a new kind of inhumanity and indifference to death that no longer stemmed from fanaticism, but from system and certainty. The longer the war continued, the more this difference eroded Japan's will. Faith cannot survive arithmetic forever. By the time the first American landing craft approached Iwo Jima in February 1945, the outcome was already known. What remained was the proving of inevitability, the final confirmation that the empire's warriors, no matter how courageous, were no longer the masters of war, only its victims. The collapse of Japanese confidence had begun long before Uema, on the black sands of Iwo Jima. It ended. Kuribayashi read the pattern as clearly as any field commander could. He knew the arithmetic. The Marines could replace men and materiel in a way his island garrisons could not. He accepted the unavoidable conclusion and answered it not by hoping to win in the old sense, but by redefining what victory would mean for the defenders' delay, attrition, and a moral indictment of the invader. For months he studied American doctrine, maps, captured manuals, and the outcomes of landings across the Marshalls and the Marianas. What emerged was not a plan to beat the Marines, but a plan to make them pay at every yard. His defense was surgical rather than ceremonial. Bunkers melted into the mountain. Fields of fire overlapped with tunnels that turned the island into a single corporate stronghold where movement was secret and death was meted out from places the Marines could not see. Kuribayashi refused to build an outward-facing bulwark meant to be admired in peacetime photographs. He accepted defeat as a premise and converted it into a weapon. If we cannot stop them from coming ashore, then we will make each shore a grave. Marines mill that strategic redefinition was complemented by small unit terror. Marine raiders and other elite units, those who struck deep, who slipped past wire and mines and vanished into the night, did what conventional doctrine expected of elite forces. They created disproportionate fear and forced endless diversion of resources. These raids were not decisive in themselves, but they were catalytic. Each successful penetration increased the tempo of Marine operations, focused Japanese attention, and fed the impression that the invader was everywhere at once. Kuribayashi anticipated such raids and wired his defenses to absorb and exploit them, turning moments of enemy daring into prepared killing grounds. In the end, Kuribayashi's plan proved the bitterest possible vindication of the thesis that had been forming since Guadalcanal. Courage alone could no longer determine outcomes. The Japanese defensive art became a ledger of cost. How many Marines the island could take with a hand, a moral argument rehearsed in concrete and steel. The Americans counted those costs, logged the losses, and continued. The island's death rate became a metric by which history would later judge both sides, one for its capacity to endure pain as a system, the other for its willingness to expend it as strategy. They relied on logistics, firepower, and coordination. If a bunker resisted rifle fire, it was hit with a flamethrower. If a hill defied infantry attack, it was shelled by artillery. If the artillery could not dislodge defenders, naval gunfire was called in. If that still failed, carrier aircraft dropped bombs until nothing moved. Every level of the Marine system, platoon, company, battalion, regiment, had the ability to summon greater power from the layers above it. This made their advance methodical, inevitable, and terrifying. Japanese soldiers, trained to believe that moral strength could overcome material weakness, now faced an enemy that treated warfare as a problem of engineering. The Marines calculated how much ammunition was required to destroy a bunker and delivered that exact amount, and advanced behind the smoke and flame with precision and discipline. Their courage was not reckless, but procedural. They attacked because the plan required it, not because emotion drove them forward. Colonel Takashima, writing from Saipan before his death, expressed this bewildered respect. Their spirit is not like ours. We fight with passion, they fight with method. They do not shout or wave flags. They move forward as if each man is part of a single machine. When one falls, another steps forward, and the machine continues. This perception that American combat power was industrial, not only in production but in psychology, marked the decisive, psychological break in Japanese military confidence. The Imperial Army could not match such an enemy. Factories in Detroit and Pittsburgh produced the tanks, rifles, and ships. But the Marines turned that industrial abundance into doctrine. They fought as an expression of a society built on mass production, specialization. In coordination, every island from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima became a demonstration of this principle. Courage multiplied by machinery, precision fused with endurance. By the time Kuribayashi's men dug into the volcanic rock of Iwo Jima, they understood what awaited them. The Marines would come, and nothing, neither sacrifice nor darkness, nor death itself, could stop the advance of that relentless machine. Japan's army had entered the Pacific War, believing that courage could compensate for material inferiority. On Saipan, that belief disintegrated under the weight of Marine firepower. What Endo and his comrades witnessed was not merely superior weaponry, was an entirely different conception of war. To the Marines, destruction was a process, not a contest of wills. Every engagement followed a pattern of reconnaissance, suppression, annihilation, and advance. Individual bravery mattered, but it existed within a system that multiplied its effectiveness through coordination and technology. Japanese officers described this as battles without pause. When one layer of defense fell, the Americans did not halt to regroup. Engineers cleared obstacles as tanks rolled forward. Artillery shifted fire to the next ridge while infantry consolidated. Naval guns maintained a curtain of explosions along the Japanese rear. The effect was of a single organism devouring the battlefield piece by piece. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Sito, commanding the Saipan garrison, wrote in his final message before committing suicide, "The enemy's power is beyond human understanding. Their fire never ceases. Their machines never rest. We have fought bravely, but bravery has no meaning when faced with steel that does not tire." By the end of the Saipan campaign, fewer than 1,000 of Saito's 30,000 troops remained alive. The island's fall not only opened the path to Japan's homeland, but also shattered the last illusions within the Imperial Army. Reports from survivors described Marines who combined technology, discipline, and relentless aggression with a precision that seemed mechanical yet terrifyingly human. After Saipan, Japanese strategy shifted from attempting victory to seeking delay. Commanders like Kuribayashi on Iwo Jima no longer believed in triumph, only in endurance. They studied battles like Saipan and Tarawa, not for hope, but for understanding. The lesson was clear. America had transformed warfare into an industrial process. Japan's soldiers, bound by tradition and constrained by scarcity, were now fighting not just an army, but the full machinery of modern civilization. The Marines hit the beaches precisely as Kuribayashi had anticipated. Artillery cut down the first waves, machine guns shredded the next, yet each time, survivors pressed forward. Mortar fire raked the dunes, flamethrowers purged bunkers, and tunnels allowed defenders to emerge unexpectedly, delivering concentrated bursts of lethal fire. The island became a choreography of destruction, each side playing its part in a brutal, predictable sequence. Casualties mounted on both sides, but the calculus remained unchanged. For the Marines, losses could be replaced. For the Japanese, every death was final. Yet Kuribayashi's system amplified each defender's sacrifice, making every bullet, shell, and grenade count. Small units directed fire with precision. Interlocking fields created overlapping zones of attrition. Every landing craft approached with risk measured to the millimeter. Every advance accounted for an advance. By the end of the first day, the beachhead had been established, but the cost was staggering. American divisions had paid in blood to gain ground that Kuribayashi had prepared to defend. And yet the island's defenses had fulfilled their purpose. Each step forward had been bought at maximum price. The Marines continued, relentless and disciplined, exemplifying the very principles that had shattered Japanese assumptions from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima. Kuribayashi's design, executed perfectly, demonstrated both the brilliance and the futility of Japanese defensive strategy in the face of an enemy whose resolve and resources could not be matched. The Battle of Iwo Jima would not produce a Japanese victory, but it would impose one final, profound lesson that courage and ingenuity, even when meticulously applied, could slow but never stop an opponent whose strength was backed by the full weight of an industrial nation. Kuribayashi's message distilled decades of combat experience. Courage alone could not counter an enemy who treated loss as a replaceable commodity. The Marines fought with a precision that amplified every death into further progress. Every defensive success was temporary. Every prepared killing ground was overcome. From Guadalcanal to Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and finally Iwo Jima, Japanese soldiers and commanders alike had observed the same principle against an opponent with unlimited replacements: unbroken discipline and the will to absorb catastrophic casualties. Resistance could slow but not prevent inevitable advance. The arithmetic was cruel and immutable. The more the Japanese fought, the faster their losses accumulated. The longer the battle lasted, the more the Marines adapted, replaced losses, and pressed forward. Kuribayashi's defenses, brilliant in conception and execution, imposed maximum cost, but they could not change the outcome. Every bunker destroyed, every hill secured, was a testament to human ingenuity and sacrifice, but also to the industrial might of a nation that treated men and material as interchangeable parts in a relentless machine. In the end, Yuma was a final proof of a truth Japanese forces had learned at Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima. The war was lost not because of cowardice or poor leadership, but because mathematics and production had overtaken doctrine, and courage alone could no longer determine victory. Kuribayashi's final note: the Marines are the most effective fighting force I have encountered was both acknowledgement and epitaph. The prisoner explained that Marine recruits were deliberately broken down mentally and physically, stripped of any individual identity, then reconstructed through exhaustion, competition, and discipline into units whose cohesion and resolve were absolute. A Marine squad did not think as individuals. It acted as an extension of a larger organism. Each member conditioned to absorb loss, continue the mission, and compensate for the failure of comrades without hesitation. Japanese intelligence officers recorded their disbelief. Lieutenant Colonel Kenjiro Hayashi, interrogating the prisoner on Saipan in July 1944, noted, "They do not falter. They do not pause. They will continue until the objective is taken or they are destroyed entirely. Their losses do not degrade their effectiveness. They simply continue." For officers trained to value both the individual and the unit, this concept was alien. In Japanese doctrine, losses were sacred, and unnecessary sacrifice was wasteful. The Marines had inverted that principle, using human life as both tool and measure of success. The reports concluded that no defensive system could survive against such an enemy indefinitely. Whether on fortified beaches, jungle ridges, or volcanic hills, the Marines' combination of unrelenting initiative, overwhelming firepower, and systematic training created a force that could give in time and support almost any position. The lesson, repeated from Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima, was clear: Japan could not defeat them. It could only delay them, impose costs, and bear witness to the relentless arithmetic of modern war. Takashi's charge was textbook according to Japanese doctrine. Every soldier advanced with bayonet fixed, shouting the traditional battle cry, relying on speed, surprise, and the perceived vulnerability of the enemy. The terrain favored the defenders. Open fields swept by machine guns and pre-registered artillery. Takashi expected the Americans to break under sudden, concentrated aggression. What happened instead stunned his command. Marines held their positions with a discipline that seemed impervious to fear. When the first wave fell, the second did not pause. It pressed forward with calculated aggression. Machine gun teams continued firing even when wounded. Riflemen reloaded and fired under direct assault, and flamethrower squads cleared obstacles methodically. Each time Japanese soldiers closed on a position, Marines responded with coordinated fire, grenades, and demolition charges, always maintaining the integrity of the defensive line. By the end of October 25th, Takashi's 3,000-man force had been annihilated. Over 2,800 were killed, nearly 200 captured, and every objective they had hoped to seize remained in American hands. Survivors described a psychological shock unlike anything they had experienced before. They had been trained to believe that courage and momentum could overcome firepower. Yet these Marines advanced, despite catastrophic losses. They did not hesitate, falter, or retreat. They attacked because stopping was not an option, because to do so would betray every Marine who had come before them. The Battle of Saipan, in Takashi's failed charge, became an enduring case study for Japanese officers. Numerical superiority and doctrinal audacity meant little against a force conditioned to absorb casualties. Act collectively and advance relentlessly. The Marines had internalized both courage and system, creating a human instrument whose capacity for endurance defied traditional military calculation. The battle shattered long-held beliefs. Japanese doctrine assumed that shock, momentum, and courage would compel any enemy to break under overwhelming assault. On Saipan, that principle failed entirely. The Marines did not yield to fear, did not pause to recover, and did not break under the tide of human waves crashing against them. Their response was organized, disciplined, and lethal. Every soldier acted in concert, every unit supported its neighbors, and every counterattack was measured to maximize effect. Japanese observers noted a fundamental shift. It was no longer merely the quality of individual soldiers that determined outcomes, but the combination of training, unit cohesion, and unyielding doctrine applied across a system with inexhaustible depth. Courage alone could no longer prevail. Superior tactics could only slow an opponent who was in effect. Designed to absorb and overcome catastrophe, Taishi Yoshida's words echoed across every Japanese garrison. We were lied to. Their courage is not like ours. They fight not because they are fearless, but because they are built to continue when all fear has been stripped away. We cannot stop them, and we cannot outlast them. Saipan, in this light, became more than a battlefield. It became a template for understanding Marine operations throughout the Pacific. Guadalcanal had offered hints. Tarawa confirmed them. Peleliu and Iwo Jima codified the reality. Against the Marines, Japanese valor and doctrine were insufficient. Only attrition, sacrifice, and delay were possible, and even those tools were rendered provisional against. It's an enemy whose systematized violence left no pause, no refuge, and no safe moment to regroup. To Japanese observers, it appeared almost inhuman. The Marines did not fight to survive, they fought to achieve objectives. Every rifle, every machine gun, every tank, and every artillery shell was a component of a larger design. Losses were absorbed, gaps immediately filled, and no pause ever occurred. A position could be fortified for months, but once the Marines attacked, it was only a matter of minutes before it was destroyed, seized, or bypassed. Lieutenant Fuku wrote, "This is not courage. It is a system, a machine built to ensure that death of any part does not halt progress. We do not possess such an army. We do not possess such a nation." For soldiers like Corporal Matsumoto, the realization was devastating. It was no longer enough to fight bravely, to exploit terrain, or to prepare ambushes. The Marines' industrial and organizational capacity rendered these efforts provisional. Every bunker destroyed, every hill seized, every casualty inflicted on the enemy became a momentary obstacle, not a decisive one. The arithmetic of modern war had shifted. Japan's courage could never outweigh America's capacity to replace men and materiel, and every battle became a demonstration of that inexorable principle. From Guadalcanal to Saipan, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and finally Uema, Japanese forces confronted the same lesson. Fighting spirit and clever tactics could not overcome an opponent who fought as a coordinated, relentless, and replenished machine. In the end, the Marines' effectiveness was both moral and material. They proved that systematic training, industrial support, and unceasing aggression could redefine the limits of warfare itself. Japanese commanders quickly realized that traditional defensive, doctrine-rigid hierarchies, pre-planned fields of fire, and reliance on morale and courage was inadequate against Marines who combined initiative with industrial support. Sergeant-level decisions, rapid exploitation of gaps, and immediate coordination with artillery and air power meant the battlefield was no longer static. Every delay, every hesitation by Japanese leadership magnified the enemy's advantage. The psychological impact was profound. Flamethrowers, artillery barrages, and the relentless pace of assault created an environment where death was inevitable, and heroic sacrifice could not influence outcomes. Lieutenant Colonel Kenjiro Hayashi, who survived Peleliu, recorded in his post-battle report, "We can fight, we can die. But against the Marines, no matter our valor, the position falls. They will come again and again, as if the cost does not exist." By 1944, intelligence reports from every garrison in the Pacific codified a consensus. Marines were not merely soldiers, they were a force designed to endure, adapt, and exploit faster than Japanese units could respond. Their combination of relentless aggression, decentralized decision-making, overwhelming firepower, and logistical support made them the most effective and feared enemy encountered in the war. The lesson was inescapable. The Pacific War was no longer a contest of courage or tactical cleverness. It was a conflict of endurance systems and industrialized lethality. The Tinian document reflects a grim calculus. Japanese defenders could no longer fight to win, only to delay. Every day of resistance was valuable. Every Marine killed or wounded inflicted cost on the enemy, but victory was impossible. Commanders were instructed to stock positions with maximum ammunition, build redundant defenses, and plan to fall back in stages, accepting the likelihood of death. Success was measured not in territory retained, but in time gained and casualties inflicted. Intelligence officers noted that Marines would exploit any weakness immediately. Their decentralized command allowed sergeants and corporals to make decisions that Japanese doctrine reserved for senior officers. A defensive gap could be probed, reinforced, or bypassed before Japanese commanders even realized it existed. Night attacks, infiltration, and combined arms assaults, once considered extreme or exceptional, were now routine. The Marines turned every battlefield into a machine of relentless pressure. The guidance concluded with a sober acknowledgement. Japanese forces could not stop the Marines. They could only make the cost as high as possible. The document marked the point at which Japanese leadership fully understood that the war in the Pacific was no longer a contest of valor or skill. It was a contest of industrialized warfare and relentless, systemic aggression. Kuribayashi framed his mission as cold arithmetic because nothing else remained. If war could be reduced to sums, then the defender's only contribution was to maximize the numerator of enemy loss while minimizing any illusion of respite. He turned Iwo Jima into a machine for converting Japanese sacrifice into American cost. Interlocking fields of fire that funneled attackers into pre-registered kill zones, depth of position that forced advancing units to bleed through layer after layer, tunnels that allowed defenders to vanish and reappear where they were least expected. Every bunker, every chamber, every choke point was calculated not to preserve territory, but to convert lives into time. He asked his men to accept a mission with no victory and to find meaning in the arithmetic of delay. That request was both strategic and ethical, a postponement of defeat in the hope that the empire might buy a political alternative, and an insistence that honor could be redefined as the willingness to make one final, measurable difference in the calculus of history. Kuribayashi's math did not change the outcome. It did, however, turn each square meter of volcanic soil into testimony, a ledger of sacrifice that would complicate any future. Moral accounting about the price of invasion, Asterisk when the island finally yielded. It yielded evidence more than triumph. Evidence that industrial war had outrun spiritual myth. That doctrine must follow production, and that courage without replenishment is ultimately finite. Kuribayashi's defense did not save Japan. It did force the United States to pay in blood at scales that reshaped the final phases of the conflict. In that terrible balance, the last honest question became not whether the defenders had fought well, but whether a nation prepared to suffer such losses could ever be spared the fate their numbers foretold. More arrive every day. They do not weaken. They do not slow down. They do not stop. I thought our spirit was stronger than American materialism. I was wrong. The Marines have both spirit and material. They have courage equal to ours combined with weapons and supplies we cannot match. They are what we claim to be. We are what we claimed they were. This is the truth we die knowing. Dawn brought flame and noise. A Marine demolition team worked under covering fire for 6 hours before the bunker finally yielded. All 11 defenders were killed, and 3 Marines were wounded. Engineers reduced the position while other units moved past the gap, exploiting the exact pattern Kuribayashi had feared, a costly local victory that mattered less than the tempo of the attacker. That hour and 40 minutes of delay bought nothing but a ledger entry time counted. It's not territory saved. This sequence repeated thousands of times across the island. Small units fought with desperate courage. Entire defensive complexes were taken apart. Piece by the methodical application of combined arms and continuous pressure. The campaign closed on the 26th of March. The final figures tell the arithmetic of the struggle. Roughly 70,000 Marines assaulted Yuma, suffering about 26,000 casualties, including nearly 7,000 killed. Japanese losses were absolute. Approximately 21,000 defenders died. Only on the order of a few thousand were captured, most because they were incapacitated or unconscious. Kuribayashi's defenses did exactly what he intended. They maximized American cost, turned every meter into a terrible calculus, and imposed an attrition the invader could not ignore. They failed at the only thing that mattered, strategically stopping the advance, but they succeeded at a different, grim purpose: to make the price of invasion almost unimaginably high. For Japanese soldiers, the lesson that had been learned from Guadalcanal onward was now confirmed in volcanic ash and concrete, against an opponent able and willing to pay catastrophic losses. Courage and cunning could only delay the inevitable. More arrive every day. They do not weaken. They do not slow down. They do not stop. I thought our spirit was stronger than American materialism. I was wrong. The Marines have both spirit and material. They have courage equal to ours, combined with weapons and supplies we cannot match. They are what we claim to be. We are what we claimed they were. This is the truth we die knowing. Dawn brought flame and noise. A Marine demolition team worked under covering fire for 6 hours before the bunker finally yielded. All 11 defenders were killed, and 3 Marines were wounded. Engineers reduced the position while other units moved past the gap, exploiting the exact pattern Kuribayashi had feared, a costly local victory that mattered less than the tempo of the attacker. That 40-minute delay bought nothing but a ledger entry time counted. It's not territory saved. This sequence repeated thousands of times across the island. Small units fought with desperate courage. Entire defensive complexes were taken apart. Piece by the methodical application of combined arms and continuous pressure. The campaign closed on the 26th of March 1945. The final figures make the arithmetic plain. Roughly 70,000 Marines assaulted Iwo Jima, suffering about 26,000 casualties, nearly 7,000 killed. Japanese losses were absolute. Approximately 21,000 defenders died. Roughly 1,600 were captured, most because they were incapacitated or unconscious. Kuribayashi's defenses did exactly what he intended. They maximized American cost, turned every meter into a terrible calculus, and imposed an attrition the invader could not ignore. They failed at the only thing that mattered, strategically stopping the advance, but they succeeded at a different, grim purpose: to make the price of invasion almost unimaginably high. For Japanese soldiers, the lesson learned from Guadalcanal onward was now confirmed in volcanic ash and concrete against an opponent able and willing to pay catastrophic losses. Courage and cunning could only delay the inevitable. The Marines suffered roughly 26,000 casualties from 70,000 men, committed nearly 40%. Any other military force would have required months to recover. Yet the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions were back in action within 6 weeks. This ability to absorb losses and continue fighting became the defining characteristic that most terrified Japanese defenders. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, imprisoned in Hawaii after his capture, explained in a 1946 interview what Japanese soldiers felt facing Marines. The worst part was knowing they would never stop. You could kill half a Marine unit and the survivors would continue attacking. You could wound their leaders and sergeants would take command. You could fight them to exhaustion and they would attack again the next day. There was no way to win. You could only kill them until they killed you. That is not war. That is mutual annihilation. And the Marines had more men than we did, so American industrial capacity, which produced wave after wave of replacement Marines, astonished Japanese military planners. Intelligence reports from late 1944 noted that Marine divisions suffering up to 75% casualties on Peleliu in September were back to full strength within 3 months. The relentless ability to replace losses, combined with their willingness to accept casualties, created a force that Japanese doctrine could neither anticipate nor defeat. Those replacements landed on Iwo Jima in February and fought with the same effectiveness as veterans. This ability to regenerate defeated units was beyond Japanese capability. The Imperial Japanese Army had no comparable training system, no replacement pipeline that could maintain unit quality while absorbing catastrophic losses. American efficiency extended to every aspect of Marine operations. Wounded Marines received medical treatment within minutes of being hit. Casualty evacuation by air and sea moved injured men from battlefield to hospital ship in hours. Blood plasma, antibiotics, and surgical care saved lives at rates unprecedented in military history. Japanese wounded often died from lack of medical supplies, from infected wounds, or from injuries that American medicine routinely treated. Captured Japanese soldiers watched Marines who should have died instead survive to fight again. The final humiliation came after Japan's surrender in August 1945. Marines occupied the home islands expecting resistance from a population indoctrinated to die rather than submit. Instead, they found exhausted people grateful the war had ended. The contrast underscored a central truth of the Pacific War: Japanese courage, sacrifice, and doctrine could not overcome industrialized warfare. Systematic training and an endless capacity for replacement. Private First Class Tishi Yoshida, repatriated in 1946 after recovering from wounds received on Saipan, described his return home: "Everything we were told was lies. The Marines did not torture prisoners. They provided food, medical care, shelter. They treated us better than our own officers had. The Americans were not barbarians. We were the barbarians." This realization shattered what remained of his faith in the empire. Thousands of former Japanese soldiers reached similar conclusions. Post-war interrogation reports revealed recurring themes: respect for Marine fighting qualities, bitterness toward Japanese leadership that had deceived them about American capabilities, and recognition that the war had been hopeless from the beginning. Japan could not match American industrial capacity, or the fighting quality of troops like the Marines. The most comprehensive of these acknowledgments came from General Tadamichi Kuribayashi's final message from Iwo Jima, transmitted by radio on March 21st, 5 days before the island fell. "I have fought the Marines for 31 days. They are the finest soldiers I have encountered. Their training is superior. Their equipment is overwhelming. Their courage equals ours, and their numbers are endless. Japan cannot defeat such an enemy. We can only die fighting them and hope that our sacrifice buys time for peace negotiations that preserve something of our nation. To my fellow officers preparing to defend the home islands, know this: the Marines will come. You cannot stop them. You can only make them pay in blood for every meter of ground. Perhaps if the price is high enough, they will negotiate rather than destroy everything. That hope died with the atomic bombs in August. But Kuribayashi's assessment of the Marines proved accurate. They were the spearhead that shattered Japanese defensive lines across the Pacific. They paid a terrible price, casualty rates that would have broken lesser organizations, but they never broke, never retreated, never surrendered an objective. They became precisely what our propaganda had claimed the Imperial Japanese Army to be: invincible warriors who would fight to death rather than accept defeat. The final irony is that the Marines achieved this not through mystical spirit or racial superiority, but through systematic training and overwhelming material support. They proved that modern war demands both courage and industrial capacity, both rigorous training and superior technology, both individual sacrifice and national resources. Japan had courage and doctrine. America had everything. The Marines embodied that totality in a way no other American unit matched. Japanese veterans recognized this distinction. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, interviewed in 1975 as an old man, summarized what his generation learned fighting Marines. We were taught that spirit conquers material, that our will to die made us invincible. The Marines taught us that spirit plus material conquers, spirit alone. They were as willing to die as we were, but they had Sherman tanks and naval gunfire and unlimited ammunition and air supremacy and medical care and food and all the resources of America behind them. We had our rifles and our courage and promises of victory. That was not enough. It was never going to be enough. The Marines proved that on every island they took. The statistical record supports this conclusion. Marines fought in every major Pacific campaign. From Guadalcanal in August 1942 to Okinawa in June 1945, they suffered roughly 86,000 casualties, including 19,500 killed. Yet they never failed to take an objective, never abandoned a position once captured, and never gave Japanese forces reason to believe Marines could be defeated through superior tactics or fighting spirit. The price was terrible. The results were absolute. Post-war Japanese military analysts studying Marine operations reached unanimous conclusions. The Marines represented the ultimate expression of American military power. They combined a warrior ethos matching Japanese Bushido with industrial resources reflecting American production capacity. They trained soldiers willing to die for victory while providing those soldiers with the weapons, support, and logistics that made victory possible. This combination was unbeatable. The lessons came too late for the 21,000 Japanese soldiers who faced Marines on Iwo Jima, the 30,000 who fought them on Okinawa, or the hundreds of thousands who prepared to resist them on the home islands before surrender ended the war. Spirit alone could not prevail against a force that embodied both determination and industrial might. Those men knew only that the Marines were the enemy they feared most, the enemy their officers could not stop, the enemy who would keep coming regardless of casualties until every Japanese defender was dead. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto's final diary entry, written hours before his death in a bunker on Iwo Jima, captured this understanding. He wrote, "The Marines will win not because they are braver than we are, not because they want victory more than we do. They will win because their nation gives them everything they need to win, and they will use those resources without mercy until we are all dead. This is the truth our leaders should have told us. We are samurai fighting with swords against men with machine guns who also have the spirit of samurai. There was never any hope. There was only death." His bunker fell the next day. The Marines who cleared it found his diary, forwarded it to intelligence officers, who translated it and filed it among thousands of similar documents. The words captured a truth that Japanese soldiers across the Pacific had learned through brutal experience. Fighting the Marines was not like fighting other American forces. It was not like fighting the British, the Chinese, or any other enemy. It was fighting an opponent who combined everything Japan claimed to possess with everything Japan lacked. That combination made the Marines the most feared enemy Japanese soldiers would face. Statistics tell part of the story. The battles tell more. But the words of Japanese soldiers who survived reveal the complete picture. They fought men who would not stop, who would not surrender, who would die before accepting defeat, who had the weapons and support to make that spirit devastating. Against such an enemy, courage was not enough. Training was not enough. Determination was not enough. Nothing was enough except surrender or death. The Japanese military chose death. The Marines delivered it with systematic efficiency. That was why Japanese soldiers feared fighting the Marines more than any other unit. The Marines said they would take the objective and they took it. They said they would accept any cost and they paid it. They never stopped. Japanese defenders discovered that courage meant nothing. When facing an enemy who matched their determination and exceeded their firepower by factors that made resistance futile, that was a lesson learned in blood from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. After the war ended and propaganda dissolved, Japanese veterans acknowledged the truth their leaders had hidden. The Marines were everything Japan claimed its soldiers were, backed by everything Japan could never provide. Against such an enemy, the war was lost before it began. The Marines proved it completely, one island at a time, at a cost measured in thousands of lives on both sides. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Thank you for watching and thank you for keeping these stories